morning, guys. We are today having a space only for the single purpose of providing a bit more reading material for our friend David Hambling, who wrote for Forbes an absolutely horrendous piece based on, I'm sorry to say so, an absolute retard. We know him. We have had this discussion before. I was blocked by him on Twitter for the main reason that he's a retard and he doesn't understand shit. I'm cursing in the beginning of this space mostly because I cannot express in polite terms how much I hate the said Twitterati. Mostly because he seems unable to comprehend basic stuff, has no practical knowledge of the subjects he's speaking about. And he, well, basically is peddling the typical broken topics over the T72 in general and the T72B3 in particular. In this case, however, as I said, I'm going to be extensive not because I want to defend the tank, and that's going to be the first part of it. The disclaimer is that I maintain that the T72, as it is, as part of the generation that was spawned from the Object 430, was a great idea when it came extremely advanced in its compromise, because as every single tank, people who are a bit tank aficionados understand that the tank is a compromise between three factors, which is firepower, mobility, and protection. Apparently, David Hambling has no idea, has no clue about this, and the favelao, well, he doesn't have a brain, so he cannot grasp this. That's the biggest problem. He can read the signs, but putting them together is not possible to him. And honestly, guys, this is not, it has nothing to do against Brazilians. I love you guys. I would like you to come back to your glory days, football-wise, but not only that. But right now, I mean, like, this guy is amazing, and him being cited as an expert is something just like, it's mind-bending, mind-blowing. And I'm saying this because I do not consider myself an expert. I was asked by David Hambling to make arguments. I make a couple of them straight on the article. I screenshotted parts of it and said, okay, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie. Unfortunately, David Hambling has problems being ethical. And this is what I want to start with. The article itself is a hit piece, which is normal. I mean, like, we know whose side David Hambling is. Like, there is no much to say there. The guy is pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian, so that would sip out on how he treats this subject. However, the problem, and this is one of the replies I gave to him, it is not if you like or not something. It is not is something great or not. The problem is that your ethics as a journalist or a contributor or whatever is that when something is a lie, you just don't say it. Unless you have a hidden agenda, which, of course, we are not stupid, we're not kids, we understand exactly what it is. In this case, for instance, and I already pointed this out, we're going to start with the easiest part. The easiest part is something I already discussed with another Twitter member, Shai Muratov, which actually also based a thread over the ERA situation with the T-72 and the Ukrainian so-called better coverage. And that is something very simple, is that we have lies in the article that are easily disprovable, but we also have lies in the article that don't need a expert to actually be understood. We are going to start with, as I said, the fact that the Russian modern T90 is a way of location, so basically they are not there, yet the Ukrainians cannot seem to stop seeing them on the front line and hitting them with FPVs. That part was already something that, you know, was a bit boring because he starts the article like that. The second part, of course, is that he continues with the expert, the favelan, and that already puts me into like a state of disbelief because this is the guy who said that the that we see destroyed in Ukraine couldn't even engage its reverse. It got literally tracked. Probably I made a small analysis given the shallowness of the explosion next to Leopard 1A5 and the cut of the charring of the two front wheels. Probably there was an idler or a reciprocating wheel that was broken, and then simply the tank wouldn't move. And unlike what our friend Favelan has said about the incident, it could not have been a mine because the exact spot where the Leopard 1 was hit, if it was a mine, given the extremely low clearance of the Leopard 1A5 and the position where the mine apparently had struck, you know that the Leopard 1A5 has its secondary rack. So a mine hitting there would probably fry the whole tank. We would have an actual turret toss, something he says that happens often to the Russian tanks, which it's true, but for completely different reason than it's getting hit and it blows up. We saw more recently the footage of a T-80 BV, which is not that much different from a T design point of view from a T-72. It got hit up front in the turret, and the rear, it didn't blow. We have other footages from destroyed T-80 BVs where the Ukrainians right now are trying to hit them on the fuel line because there is where you're going to have the deflagration. Unfortunately, for a lot of tanks, your fuel line is going to be exposed at some point because you need a large volume, a large empty volume, so you can store your fuel. Let's go back to the logic. You cannot bring to the table someone you consider a expert when this guy has been already proven to be a fraud, to have no idea to what he's talking about. And by myself, I mean, I even joined the thread over Leopard 1, where he pretends that the Leopard 1 has no problem and it would be a very valuable addition to the Ukrainian military. And the first Leopard 1 we see in action, well, the addition or the valuable input is not blowing up and not killing the crew, which, by the way, in absolute terms, it's not bad. Now let's go back to T-72. First of all, a foreword about T-72. As you know, the tank itself was an extreme compromise being made on basis of the a Morozov design. For people who don't know, the Kharkiv Design Bureau has actually most of design bureaus in the Soviet Union back then had number codes. So when you're going to see an object with the number 4, it is a design coming from the design bureau in Kharkov Morozov. Morozov is going to be added later because the chief designer was Morozov, but it's basically a Kharkov design. So what's the point? The point is that the T-72 is a Tagil design from Kartsev based on a Kharkov design from Morozov. Kharkov design starts from model 430, object 430, then devolves into object 432, which would give the tank that we currently know as the T-64. And then initially the project from Kartsev was to have a mobilization tank based on the object 167, which was the T62, T62M, supposedly. So basically, for people who do not know this, I already posted a couple of things over that. Initially, the mobilization tank that was required was supposed to be the T62 with a 15 millimeter tank gun plus autoloader, and then it went into the 125 DT81 tank with the AZ autoloader. Initially, it was an AZ62, then it was just plainly AZ. The T62 was a great tank. I probably am going to make a space on that one because, as you know, I've served on a T54, T55 family, and I honestly would have liked for Albania at some point to have gone to the T62, given it would have given us as tankers back then more space to work with. Unfortunately, we broke up with the Soviet Union in '61 as Albania, and I was born way later, so whatever we found as material in the '90s when I was enlisted, well, basically had a chance to be the said tank, not even T-72. But fast forward, the situation with the T-72 is, as I said, a compromise, a technical compromise, a tactical compromise, and a strategical compromise. With the advent of the T-64, so object 432, the issues started to happen. As you may know, the object 432 was extremely light, extremely small, extremely reduced. It was packed with both firepower, excess, honestly. Initially, it was a 115 millimeter gun with an autoloader with 28 or 30 rounds on the carousel. Later, it was reduced because the 115 was thought as lacking punch, although the Molot on the T-62 later on in the 80s was proven to actually penetrate the frontal aspect of the Chieftain. Thank you, the Iraqis. At least they did something positive with those tanks. Therefore, the Russians maybe weren't as ill-advised initially with 115, but then they decided to go for upgunning, given that the West was bringing up heavier guns, especially with the split up of the US-German program over the MBT 70. Then it was done. The T-64 was swapped from the 115 millimeter after about 400 to 500 sets with 115 to 125 with the DT81. DT81 that we know and love or hate, depending on who is on the receiving end. The tank itself has, as I said, is a mostly technical compromise to start with. It comes from a tank that was between 36 and 38 tons, the T-64 initially, which is barely heavier or almost the same weight as a T-62. But it has 3 crew members. It has an absolutely better armor protection. You need to understand that if you want to analyze the tank, you need to see its armor weight per personnel in the tank. So basically, if you have 4 crew members on the tank and your tank is 40 tons, your class weight is 10 tons per personnel. In this case, the T-64, with a lot of upgrades and a lot of thought put into it, with the flat engine, the 5TD, which was problematic, of course, the very specific transmission, which also was problematic with its Corzine autoloader, which means basket, by the way, which initially was also problematic because of the funnel in the in the autoloading system being a up, pop, and lift, while the ones thought by Carson, the AZ, is a two-stage column, which was easier to mount and also more compact within the hull. Well, all this made that the tank was roughly at 13 ton per personnel. This was simply unheard of. If you compare with the American tanks of the time, the M60, you're going to have more or less the same protection level. You would be at a roughly 14 ton per personnel. The difference, though, is that your tank is still armed with 105 millimeter, is way higher. We're speaking about over 270 from on the top of the cupola, while your T64 is about 220. So everything on the T64 that would also go on to the T72 was made to make the tank more compact, more protected, easier to use. Yes, I know for a lot of guys it's going to be a bit weird to say, okay, how is it easier with you have a completely unproven autoloader? You have a gun that if your autoloader fails, you'll have to crank it, and it's about 30 to 45 seconds to crank your carousel, pull the round out of your carousel and load it manually. On top of it, as I said, the biggest situation problem with the T72 is because of its autoloader that was better thought, but was two-stage. You now had to lift up first and second to be able to engage your gun manually if it ever failed. Well, it's easy. The tank, since the beginning, it was a lot of teething issues, T64 and then T72, was still gun-proof. And the compromise in this was that because you reduce everything, your internal volume is lower. You have good protection frontally and also on the sides when you compare it for tanks of the same era like the Leopard or the Chieftain. But you still have very little volume inside. So basically, if your tank is penetrated, the deflagration is going to go at 90% to something flammable. On the T64, that was your prop charges that were vertically and would go to the waist of the gunner and tank commander. On the T72, this was avoided by putting them on a carousel under both gunner and tank commander, but then you had the loose stowage, and the loose stowage are mostly next to the engine, next to poles, so basically petrol and lubricants, and also were into a stowage called wet, but basically who served also as a secondary fuel tank, which means that when your tank is penetrated, not hit, we're speaking about penetration here, there is a very large chance that it hits something that's going to burn. But this, once again, is not a necessity. Sometimes it's even worse. Your tank is going to get hit, it's going to start burning, but there is no penetration. One of the most interesting cases, we had it in this war, but also in another war in Chechnya, and also in Karabakh, which is basically, given that the fuel lines is on the outside, and actually we saw it also with a T64 BM Bulat shown by Andrei. If you know BVT Narod, you'll know who the guy is. You could see that the tank blew, but what was hit was the external vacuum chamber on the 5TD, a fuel port, and the engine oil that started burning. They extinguished the fire that was damaging the tank. The tank stopped somewhere. Now it's probably in repair. But as I said, you can have these situations when you're hit, and your protection or the design of the tank helps you get out of it. Anyway, let's go back to the compromise. So basically, the T-72, as I said, is a compromise, technical compromise first and foremost. It's supposed to be slightly larger, have more volume, solve some of the situational issues with the autoloader, with the spacing in the tank, but it cannot get beyond what the T-64 was, because the whole point of the Soviet Union back then was a design that would be a compromise between crew safety, protection, and firepower on top of the mobility. So when people say that the T-72B3 is a lemon, unfortunately, that makes no sense. You got a design, a bit like the Abrams, like the Leopard, like the first Challenger, which are old, which had in mind a protection level that had nothing to do with what you have right now. FPVs make most of your current protection solutions useless, because they can fly around you, they can always see you, they can outrun you. And this is one of the parts I'm going to address later on with the reverse speed, which I already addressed on the Leopard 1, and I'm going to address again and ridicule the Favelao. But unfortunately, David Hambling does not understand what combat is and what tank driving is. So let's go on with the analysis of T-72 as a preliminary note. So you have your technical compromise, then you have your tactical compromise. What is the tactical compromise? The Soviets, once they stepped from a 4-tank crew to a 3-tank crew, they completely redesigned their backbone of the units. The backbone of the units was supposed to be the 3-3-3. Remember something? Exactly. Basically, 3 crew members per tank, 3 tanks per platoon, 3 platoons per company, of course with a headquarter, but basically it was this. This 3-3-3 facilitated both the design of the maneuvers. It generally went down from roughly the 14 to 16 tank companies to about 10, which meant that you could have a lot more flexibility because your company is now smaller, you can have more companies. And this allowed the Soviet tank division to be absolutely huge, have a huge number of tanks, but also be more flexible on how it would attack, given that it had all these smaller subunits. This is one thing that, if you want to see better, you can head on to a pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian guy, Josh Helen. He explains it based on the US field manual, analyzing the behavior, or what was thought the behavior of the Soviet army. You're going to understand a lot of things, how Americans saw the Soviets, and you're going to understand why the Soviets went for a leaner tank company, tank platoon, and so on. Anyway, this is, as I said, this is the tactical the tactical compromise. Tactical compromise: less people, same firepower, leaner groups, more groups allowed, more flexibility, which means, as I said, at the battlefield you are going to provide. And then you have the strategic compromise. The strategic compromise actually is great. Why is it great? Because to make your T-72, in average, you would need in material about 25% less of what the West was making back then, except for the IMX-30 and the Leopard A1. The most numerous tanks back then, so basically M60, the Chieftain, and then would follow up with the Challenger and so on, were rather heavy tanks. Even the Centurion is a 50-ton tank. The protection on the Centurion is absolutely horrible compared to what you would get on T-72, But the weight on the Centurion, given it has to protect a crew of 4, is going to be higher. Of course, there are other things that determine how the tanks compare to each other, but in that case, everybody NATO, when T-64 and T-72 popped out, despite what they considered to be less advanced models on the T-72, was that those tanks were better armed, better protected. Of course, there was a lot of unknown and a lot of, fear-mongering, which is still the case. But on paper, those tanks outclassed whatever the NATO forces had until then. That with less material, that with less fuel, because comparatively you would need about 1,200 liters for a T-72, but between 1.5 and 1.9 thousand liters for a American tank of the era. This would be even worse with the Leopard 2s and the Challengers and the Abrams that would come later, because as you know, once again, some choices that were made for Abrams made the gas guzzler, but on top of it, the fuel provisions were for about 1,900 liters. So once again, the strategic thought behind the T-64, T-72, and then in between the T-80, because unfortunately the T-80 didn't start in the 980, but way before, just as a follow-up to the T-64, based on a design bureau in Russia, in Leningrad, and so on and so on. But that's something different. The main problem here, once we set up how the T-72 was a compromise, technical, tactical, and strategic for the Soviet Union, the technical compromise was also what the Soviet Union could build. That's one of the things that we don't need to forget. So there are things that the Soviets maybe weren't that good to, but the main core of it is that what they came up as a product, be that the T-64, T-72, or T-80, was not at all outgunned, outranged, and outclassed by whatever NATO had at that point. Quite the contrary. For a long while, the T-72 was regarded as a beast, and it still is a beast. There are issues with the tank. I will speak about them later, but right now we just put the logic behind why calling a tank like the T-72 a lemon, because modernization issues is an absolute nonsense, because you need to think based on where the tank comes from, the context, and it's also ways to modernize this said tank. Don't forget that the T-72 had multiple incremental modernization rounds. Initially, the turret was not composite. It was a monoblock with a Ural 1. Then it had the so-called quartz filling when it started to be a composite turret. Post 79, then you started to have a different turret with multiple layers, with the T-72B over 84 and then over 85. In between, you got the T-72A improved, which was a mix between the T-72A and the T-72B attributes. And then you had the T-72B over 89, which had the very characteristic hull that you see now with K5 era, and so on and so on and so on. So the logic when you speak about a old tank unmodernized and so on, it makes no sense, because the tank indeed underwent multiple rounds of modernization until the Soviet Union fell. And maybe the last grasp of this modernization process was the Object 188, 184 and 88, which became the the T90 over 92. The whole logic here, once again, is that for someone like Hamling, who obviously has no clue behind what the T-72 was and what it became, to just sit down, admit that he made a mistake by going to someone who has no clue about all these things, and start actually doing his own research what I'm doing here, once again, is a bit playing also Hambling's game, because Hambling, if he listens to this space, he's just not going to learn anything from this situation. What he's going to do is, once again, just listen to this, and I'm pretty sure he's going to take it as, we say in French, parole d'évangile, which is a real problem here. If you, once again, I will repeat, your ethics as a journalist, contributor, whatever, is to be sure of what you post, source it properly. The source here, Favelan, says that the T-72B3 has no thermals. So basically, its main gun sight is not equipped with a thermal matrix. This, of course, is completely false. We have seen multiple videos, hundreds of videos of the Sosna thermal matrix being used in combat and proving its metal. One of those is a T-72/T-80 BVM targeting a Leopard 2 that was stuck during the first days of the counteroffensive at Rabotino and lighting it up. Its internal sights, you can see the ATGM being fired at it. And after the first contact, the alleged, but I trust the source, Leopard 2 starts burning. So what the fuck is going on with this guy, right? Why does a man like David Hambling go out of his way to find the least qualified commenter or analyst, let's call it whatever David Hambling wants? Well, he has a very pro-Ukrainian, very critical commenter like Andriy Tarasenko, which you all know under the name of Baron Harkonnen if you visit a couple of forums, or under his name Andrei BT on Twitter, when he keeps spewing negative thoughts about the Russian tank and armored vehicles industry. Even him was going to give you a more nuanced and a more logical argument against the T-72, because you can be against the T-72 and literally say that the T-72 is not the right tank for the future of the Russian Federation ground forces. You can have that opinion. I don't care. This here is not about an opinion on how great or how bad the T-72 is. It is about writing down lies and things that are false. And let's begin with the article properly. So first of all, we have the situation where, okay, as I said, the T-72B3, mainstay of the Russian armored forces, is a lemon. And we say when you need tanks urgently, like Russia, which loses tanks every day, many bad tanks are better than no tanks. The problem is that, like everything, you cannot compare something out of a whim. What the Russians have as a tank, if it's the T-72B3, compared to what Ukrainians have now as their mainstay, there is no difference on select areas. The core tanks that the Ukrainians have right now are mostly either modernized T-72M1s, either modernized T-64 BVs, Ober 17, Ober 22, or plain Jane Ober 85. Either in best case scenario, and we're speaking about volumes here, we're not speaking about the sharpest edge in the tool, we're speaking the common thread for the T-72B3. Or then, in some cases, PT-91s from Poland. So let's compare these tanks. Let's be logical. There is no main difference between those tanks and the T-72B3. Actually, they're rather underwhelming. The matrix used on the T64 BV over 17 and over 22 is supposedly a Polish so-called third generation, but when you see it closely on the various footage that the Ukrainians have provided themselves, there is not such a great difference. Actually, it's even worse. Those tanks still work with a so-called fishbowl. So basically, you have a binocular or monocular display where your gunner or your tank commander needs to put his face next to them and see through a very narrow field of view. We're not speaking about the field of view of the matrix or the site. We're speaking about the field of view of your human sitting behind the system. Comparatively, the T72B3 has a CRT device, so basically it has a small screen where it is looking at the tank. Most importantly, its fire control system works in a very close fashion to the American M1A1 anno 2003. So basically, you don't need anymore to start looking at your targeting system like it used to be before that with the T72B over 89, when you needed to check your laser system, and then due to the calculation, you will have to watch out your FCS and reevaluate everything and let the tank indeed do the planner, hold out, and then shoot. Here, the tank, the 1A40, does everything itself. And that's how you see the guys pointing out the target, pressing the measuring button, and you got an automatic laying out of the gun, more or less to the same point. Is it refined enough? So far, it has been proven it is good enough. On the Ukrainian side, you have something different, which is you need to laze, and you still need to have a holdout in a different way. This is something that Ukrainians themselves have said, where the Russian tanks are more advanced. But this, again, it has nothing to do with Ukraine itself. Ukrainians are not stupid. They just have less means. They had less means. Their tank industry was savaged because for a long while, until at least 2019, they couldn't produce their own tanks without parts sourced from Russia. And it was a huge scandal for a while that Kharkiv Morozov was still having contacts with the Russian VPK, so basically MIC. These are things that David Hamblin completely ignores because he doesn't know them. His mind, his brain has no idea what's going on there. Then let's go to the second spot, because this is the funny part. This is where I actually started to be extremely angry. By failing to upgrade the tanks with modern equipment, Russia was shooting itself in the foot. Once again, you need to compare what Russia needs on the spot and what it has. If the T-72B3 is a problem for you, well, unfortunately, the average range of combat, as we are seeing right now, on both sides, is exactly what was thought 30, 40, 50 years ago. Most of the combat involving tanks are still close-range anti-infantry, anti-material fights. Very little tank-to-tank combat, given the fact that your line of sight is reduced between 1,500 and 2,000 meters. In average, you can find a larger alleyways to be using your tanks, but mostly you don't. And this is the huge problem, that for whatever reason you are trying to trash the T-72B3. Its equipment, at least the thermal one, is extremely efficient for the role it is occupying right now, the type of warfare it's waging right now. The T-72 has problems, but that have nothing to do with whatever we have read so far. Now, the T-72 series, sometimes described as the most widely used battle tank in the world, not sometimes described, it's a fact. After the T-54-55, by the way, was first produced in 1972. Let's start with the joke. the production line for T-72 doesn't start in 72. It started in 73. It's a minor argument, and literally, I just pointed to be annoying to Mr. Hambling. But a simple counter check would have shown you that while the tank was approved for production in 72, its production started a year later in very, very minimal orders. Basically about 30. And why? Because the factory producing the T-72 was still needing to switch from its production of the T-62. No problem. Let's forget it. Nobody's perfect. It was succeeded by T-80, then T-90 series. Technically, T-80 was successor to 64 and T-90 to 72, but numbers give chronological. No, the numbers do not give the chronological order. No. The object 2019 was thought almost immediately after the object 432. The team in St. Petersburg was trying to have a turbine tank which would become the T-80 for fucking ages. I'm cursing, I know, I don't care. Unlike modern tanks like the T-90M, the TB-3 does not even have satellite navigation. Well, that's the funny part. Satellite navigation within the current war makes no sense. And I'm going to tell you why it makes no sense. First of all, satellite navigation would mean you not knowing how to read the map. If you're in the military, you don't know how to read the map, you're a fucking asshole and a moron. And you need literally to get canned out. I know that Ukrainians complain that when they went to train in Europe, they were baffled that they were still having orientation courses with map and compass. But that's the fucking point. You will need satellite navigation if you're navigating in a complete featureless field. The difference, though, is that given the very short-term movement that we're having, bygone is the era of big arrow pushes when you're gonna do a Valuki beyond Poltava in one go. No, that's when you're gonna need your navigation system, and still the GPS makes no sense if it's not integrating a battle management system, but that's something else, and unfortunately Favelao cannot think that far because unfortunately for Favelao, he has never been in the military, and I have it for 1,000%. So having satellite navigation is not your BMW or your Volkswagen car. What you are doing when you are in the military, you're navigating an area where you have a map, a topographic map, a military map, a physical map. You got a inertial navigation system just in front of you when you're a driver. And if you know how to use it, once again, if you know how to use it, you have no problem navigating a pre-planned road. All the rest, once you're involved in combat, when it comes to the maneuvering, the way you react under fire, the way you counteract, or the way you ambush and so on, does not need a GPS. Neither does your GPS allow you to avoid what he says later, the lack of effective navigation when the vehicle is driving with hatches down might explain why T-72s sometimes end up in rivers driven into lakes. No, what happens when those vehicles drive into lakes or end up in rivers mostly is that the driver does not know the immediate surroundings. Your GPS is not going to solve your situation. Getting lost because you badly read the map is one thing, but ending in a short-term situation when you're going to basically drown your tank, It has nothing to do with GPS. It has to do with a mistake by the crew, a wadi, a creek, whatever you want that. We had the assault right now in Avdivka when at least two small vehicles fell out of the pontoon bridge that they had laid up. If you come back to that place a couple of months later and look at it without the context, you could say, oh, he got lost, so he fell right there. This, once again, is one thing that in the article I found absolutely horrible, which is foregoing context and trying to explain people that something happens because this complete lack of integrity on part of Hambling, not because he knows better, but because he took the word of someone else without analyzing it himself, or even trying to get a skilled operator of any kind of vehicle. So when you see Ukrainians running over mines, when you see Ukrainians also falling down into swamps and all that stuff, is it because they lack GPS, or is it because they are trying to see where they can pass based on what they have as their map? Anyway, let's go on the next step. Also missing is an effective thermal imager, an essential aid in night fighting. Russian media reports that T-72B3s are now getting thermal system, which can detect targets from 3 kilometers away, but Trost says the reports have not been confirmed. We are going into Ryan Macbeth territory here. Ryan Macbeth is a Twitter poster and a contributor, quote unquote, that had not seen Cornets, the Cornet ATGM missile, for 20 months, despite every single day a Cornet strike being posted by the Russians. At least 600. Like, I understand that you are quoting a rabid anti-Russian poster and a mush for brains poster, but at least open Twitter and type T-72 thermals. On top of it, it is true that the Russians are using tanks with both thermal imagers and without thermal imagers. And this is logical for a lot of things. First of all, the tanks within this war very quickly stopped their role as anti-tank machines. That is probably the the smallest percentage of their engagements. Most of the engagements are actually fire support or mobile artillery, either in direct line of sight, either in drone-aided indirect fire. This problem, though, with our friend Hambling is that, once again, it's simple self-awareness. You just open Twitter, I said, you type that, you're going to have easily 200 to 300 videos. On top of it, unfortunately for the pro-Russians, so for me as well, we have enough videos of captured tanks and vehicles from the Ukrainian side. We have T-80 BVMs, we have T-72B3s, we have T-90As, T-90Ms, and you can see inside, they have filmed them, and you can see your panel for the thermal definition. You got your screen, shared screen, because that's the funny part. The commander on the T-72B3M initially had a shared screen. It has been retrofitted to the T-72B3s and so on and so on. You also have now a mobilization variant of the T-72B, which has a other Russian-made, the 1P96 thermal sight, which is also good enough. Yet apparently neither Favelan or Hamling have been able to see these videos. And we're 21 months in the war, but apparently it's not there. It's just not there. Nobody can see them. And that's what I'm saying. Here we are just having a laugh. This article is garbage. And it gets more garbage later on when he quotes David Axe, which is probably one of the worst offenders when it comes to overreacting, overhyping, and completely missing the point. Case in point, Cornet has overhead top attack mode. You know that. I don't need even to discuss it. Once you say that, you're done. You just throw everything that David Axe publishes down the toilet, or use it to start your barbecue, whatever, but you don't read it because you're going to lose brain gray matter. This leaves tank commander this leaves tank commanders with a basic night vision system, which Ross says has effective range of around 500 meters. Now, the problem with Favelão is that he's probably not even aware of how stupid he sounds. Tests were already had by the Canadians with the T-72M1, which was an export variant produced by the Czechs and the Poles. Czechoslovaks, by the way, because at the time they worked together. And using the infrared searchlight, although the infrared searchlight has less pulse power than what the West was using as infrared searchlight, but it's also smaller. It's not a huge TV like you can see on some Leopard 1 tanks or M60s. The values quoted in the article are for the passive sight without the aid of the infrared searchlight. With the infrared searchlight, you can go between, depending on how the twilight is, so the luminescence on the sky, the moon, and so on, between 800 to 1,500. This, of course, has a price, as I've said. If you are facing an enemy who has a thermal sight, given that you're using basically a huge searchlight in infrared, your enemy, if he has thermal, is going to see you. But once again, this has nothing to do with the value given in the article, which is 500 meters. By the way, the commander has its own infrared searchlight with his own cupola sight. The infrared searchlight with the auxiliary sight for the gunner is the huge kind of pan that you see on the side of the main gun. Now, this is, I mean, I'm going to provide evidence, but here we are having this logic failure and this just basic due diligence issue that I'm sorry, I cannot believe that Hambling is still being paid by Forbes to write this shit, especially as he based every single piece of that article on the most flimsy evidence and setting up the discussion for a basic Russia bad, T-72 bad, these guys are failing. And then we follow up on the article. It is bizarre. It is a bizarre omission given that thermal images are now so cheap that Russians are even equipping disposable FPVs drones with them. Yes, my friend, it's true. It's true that the matrices that go on the FPVs are exactly the same that you need for a main battle tank to be slaved with your FCS and your main gun. This is such a brain take, mega brain take. I personally, I'm like, oh wow, man, like, where were you? I mean, like, the Russians could have saved so many rubles with this thought process. It's amazing. Poor chances of survival. T-72 also suffer from a more basic design flaw, the lack of effective reverse gear. First of all, this phrase means nothing. The lack of an effective reverse gear, that would mean that the T-72 cannot reverse. I don't know which journalist school David Hambling went, but this is absolute trash. The T-72 can reverse. The difference is that it doesn't go as fast as other tanks. That doesn't mean that this is not effective. The reverse speed for the T-72, for actually all Object 432 derivatives, has been an ongoing meme. And it has been an ongoing meme because it has been made up by people who do not understand how a tank works and how a tank driver operates. I've had this discussion with multiple guys, including so-called pro-Russians, who said, yeah, we are not having a reversing at 4, at 11, oh my man, we're losing. No, guys, the problem is that when you are a tank driver, you see shit. So trying to reverse at 32, unless you have a complete control of your reverse area, is just going to land you into a fucking ditch, a tree, another tank, a group of your own soldiers, etc., etc., etc. It is very useful in select situations. One of them is basically picking up, shooting, quickly reversing back 10, 20, 30 meters in a pre-prepared position, pre-guard position. But any kind of long-term reverse makes no sense. Why? It's very simple. Once you go cross-country with your tank, and despite the Leopard 2, for instance, being equipped with rear view mirrors, that was the funny part, those mirrors are going to get dirty, destroyed, unusable within half an hour if you are going cross country. Secondly, as I said, you are having zero, once again, zero visibility on the back. When I was serving on a tank, what we did is that 3 persons were used to make a reverse of about 50, 60 meters up to transport the truck. One on the left, one on the right, and one in front relaying the guys if he needed to go left or right. So the whole crew was out helping out the driver put the tank back. This is the exact same thing in this position. The driver has no visibility unless he has a reverse camera, which is also very possible. But the whole point of the reverse is that also your controls are reversed. So it's fully unnatural to have a reverse other than a straight line. And secondly, we saw it more recently with a Leopard 2, for a 6 tanks, probably a 6 from the 47th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. He was at the corner of Stepove, trying to fire down on the other corner of Stepove into a Russian position. Within the second shot, a Russian artillery round lands about 10 meters behind him. First thing that the tank does, pop out smokes, reverse up to a certain point out of so-called range, so basically 10, 20, 30 meters, do a U-turn, turn the hull front, turn the turret back in order for itself to cover with a secondary round of smokes or with a main gun, and then haul ass. The whole point of the reverse speed was disproven in that maneuver from the Ukrainian tank forces. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they don't trust their reverse speed. It is just a visibility issue. Your reverse speed is going to help you out the 10, 20, 30 meters if you are out of the line of sight. The problem in this war is that the line of sight doesn't mean as much as before, because FPVs, drones, artillery, helicopter ATGMs, and so on. And this is exactly what we saw in multiple times with Western armor. Leopard 2A5s being hit never had the time to reverse with their fucking super speed. Leopard A1, we saw it. Leopard 1 A5, we saw it. Never had the time to reverse. We've had it with the Challenger. That thing got hit with the ATGM. Where was the reverse attempt? Zero. I explained this. The reverse speed plays no fucking role. If you are under target and you get hit, you are not outrunning your ATGM, you are not outrunning your FPV, you are not outrunning the artillery round. You might, in specific cases, when it's an artillery round and so on, avoid first artillery, get hit but not get disabled, and so on. But that means absolutely nothing. And for everyone saying that, yeah, but the Russians need to turn around and show the weakest part, the Ukrainians did just the same with their Leopard 2A6. Because that's how a driver works. A driver needs to see where he's going. He needs also his natural controls. When you have tillers to drive the tank, as on the T-72, that is indeed maybe less problematic because, as I said, you have tillers, so you can understand easily how you operate. But when you have a driving wheel, as on the Leopard, then you have a problem because you, under stress, under fire, might simply forget that you need to turn the other way to go away. And this is once again what I've explained. I would even use a more important example. This example is recently a T82, not T82, a BTR 82A in Krinky, going to a spot, unloading his ammunition, and then trying to basically back off and turn around. The BTR is literally a truck. The driver has a steering wheel. But because he has no view on where he's going back, he basically gets stranded on the wet grass, gets in the mud, gets blocked, and becomes easy prey for a Ukrainian FPV. This is probably the most obvious situation where your very good reverse speed on the BTR 82A serves no purpose because you have no visibility. And we're going to have this discussion with many idiots more and more and more and more because they are not thinking within the combat operation, they are not thinking within the action itself. They are literally thinking with a spreadsheet. That's not how real life works in this case. Now we have this another well-known vulnerability of the T-72 tendency to detonate violently when hit, killing the crew instantly, often resulting in spectacular toss, blah, 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 blah. Then, this is due to ammunition storage arrangement in T-72. Trost says that the T-90M has blowout panels, which mitigate the problem, but not such measures have been applied to T-72B3. First of all, we already discussed this. Plenty of hits on T-72 when the tank doesn't blow up. Plenty of hits on T-80BV when the tank doesn't blow up, and so on and so on. Also hits where a T-90M being hit by an ATGM failed from the first shot and resulted in a full crew casualty and total destruction, AK kill, catastrophic kill of the tank. Once again, here we have a mush for brains attempt to rationalize retardation. The T-90M does not have blowout panels. Its bustle is storing about 12 rounds, 10 to 12 rounds, and it helps with keeping part of the excess storage that doesn't fit in the 22-round autoloader, so-called quote-unquote safely outside. But it only has hatches. There is no ventilation system like on the Abrams or the Leopard 2. None of this is true. Like the T-90 carousel has the same flows by design, if you want to call them flows, of course, like the T72. It's going to have a bit more pot boy on top of it. The seclusion is going to be a bit better, but overall it's just the same. Unfortunately, the auto-loading system on the T72 makes it extremely difficult to completely isolate the probe charges from the ammunition and the ammunition from the crew. You need, sorry to say it, a hole in your carousel in order to be able to pull them out. There were systems where two hinges would put two shutters on top of it, but there is still air. In order for your crew to be completely secluded, you need to have it airtight. And that, unfortunately, right now, the only system that was ever tried was a rotating hinge. So basically, it would add a about 3 centimeter thick rotating floor that would rotate around the hole on the ground, and that would add about 2 to 3 seconds more to the loading mechanism. Should have been already included. I think that it should have been included, but it was never thought technically, because it would have put a major burden on the electrical system, on the tank design, reduced the volume in the tank, and so on and so on. So they never actually thought it properly. Therefore, complete seclusion from the crew, between the ammunition and the crew, is unfortunately not possible. And it's not possible because of the design of the autoloader, because if the autoloader fails, you need to have access to it. Putting that huge rotating plate on it, and your electrical and your backup system fails, means that your tank is actually out of combat, given that you are going to reduce the load and put your load outside, which would mean putting your crew in harm's way to go outside, grab a prop charge and ammunition round, put it in the breech and fire it, and do it every time. This is what I said. The T90M has no blowout panels except for the hatches. That was the joke from a mutual. So this is just a lie. It's literally a lie. It's lacking complete integrity. Let's go back to the article. So what the upgraded T-72 does have is added contact reactive armor tiles. These explode when hit, disrupting RPGs, anti-tank missiles, and other charged projectiles. But Trost says that the coverage of T-72 is poor, leading to a number of weak spots. I would simply send you to Shai Muratov's analysis of this. It makes no fucking sense. Sorry to curse again. The coverage is not poor, quite the contrary, and it hasn't been made to spare money. Andre, for years, has said that the coverage is poor, but unfortunately, it doesn't change much. The coverage has gaps if it's a seamless or not. Why? Because the fucking turret is rounded. Plus, there is the added composite protection post Ober 85 and Ober 89, which means that you are going to have to put up a superstructure like the Ukrainians have done, and still do not have the protection on every single degree of the angle they're trying to protect. On top of it, as I said, the era is basically unchanged on coverage since '89, and accordingly, the T80BV and T80U have supposedly better coverage. They still are failing the same, because once again, a degree or two are not going to change your survival chances when it comes to combat, because combat is not a video game and combat is not numbers. Result of combat is numbers, logistics, and so on. But the individual situation, as I said, you can see you have a that video that Andre posted with the T-64BM that quote unquote survived a ATGM attack. The tank was still toast. The engine was to be replaced. The expansion chamber for the 5TD was still to be replaced, and the tank was to be pulled. The only thing that was positive is that the tank didn't completely blow off. But for all matters, all purposes, that tank was out for at least 1 or 2 months. Maybe less if they had the engine ready and so on, but you had a integrity breach on engine on the engine cache, engine bay. Rush upgrades of its even older T-62 are also fraught with problems. Probably the weight of additional armor puts strain on the engine and slows the already underpowered by modern Tyrant's vehicle down. This is based on David Ack's article, which is completely baseless. The biggest issue with the T-62 when it comes to the upgrade is that the T-62 per se doesn't need the mobility of a T-72 or doesn't need the mobility of a T-80 or T-64 or T-90. Yet it achieves the exact same mobility that it was designed with in the 50s. So once again, we are with this discussion where we have people having no clue to what they write and just throwing shit out there, seeing if it sticks. Yet nobody is able to go there and say, guys, this is stupid. And it's logical. We shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't matter. Me being like all worked up because a dude wrote something on Forbes, it's useless. I'm doing this because David contacted me back by saying, oh yeah, you know, if you can do better, please do better. Yes, indeed, I can do better. The problem is that this is proving to be excruciatingly bad for you because clearly you haven't made your due diligence and you haven't done anything proper. Now, running out of tanks. Cheap refurbishment puts plenty of tanks into the front line, but they get chewed up rapidly. Russia is pushing ahead at full speed with bringing all T-62 tanks for storage, refurbishment, and we have a link there to prove this nonsense for the invasion force, but there are signs that the stockpiles are running low. Large numbers of FPVs and anti-tank warheads are now on one of the biggest killers. Actually, that's the funny part. If we are starting to check on the FPV itself, the subject is pretty bad. The most recent attack in Avdiivka showed that most of the tanks went up on mines, so they were lost initially on the minefield, IEDs, ATGMs, and so on, and the FPVs were used to so-called finish these tanks off. We had the same thing by the most recent BTR 82A, by the way, that were in Stepove. The guys had been blown by a mine or artillery, had lost a wheel, were stuck, and apparently the Russians had pulled out some mines out of their way to get there, and one of the mines was still on the deck of the BTR and was hit with the FPV. What destroyed that BTR? Was it the FPV or was it the mine on the ground, the artillery that immobilized it? This is the funny part. This is lack of integrity. This is lack of analysis. But this is also what has characterized the view of this war from most Western contributors. Now, if David had any kind of idea, he would check some of the numbers for the tanks. For instance, the total production of the T-72 of all kinds is roughly 22,000 on the Soviet territory. About 7,000 of those were probably lost in a way or another due to local conflict, due to being given to subsequent, I'd say, member states on the CIS. So basically, Ukraine itself received, I think, like 550 at least. T-72s, although it chose to maintain T-64s and T-80s because it was, in a sense, more geared up towards them. Anyway, so running out of tanks right now for Russia is a big word. What is an even worse word and a worse stupidity is that, as I said, the FPV's biggest killers we saw in one of the most recent FPV footage from the Ukrainian side that for one T-80BV they started to use, I think, up to 6 FPVs for one tank. Of course, tank was still destroyed. That's not the point. The point is that if you are going to need 6 FPVs for that tank that was already immobilized by the mine, the reality is something different, is that you still are hitting the same tank. So you could say that you are taking it out of the equation by blowing it up, so the Russians cannot recover it and repair it and put it back to the tank. Yes, it's true, but at the end, the tank was still immobilized, M-killed, and it was the mine that did that. And what stopped the push of that armor, it wasn't the FPV, it was the mine. Therefore, the problem is not as simple as, oh, see, we have FPVs, everything's going to be fine. And these tanks are being destroyed by FPVs. It was just the same on the Russian side, by the way. They also use FPVs to attack Western tanks. So this whole situation makes no sense. I don't really understand how Russia is going to run out of tanks because there are FPVs. Russia is going to run out of tanks if it starts to have 4,000 to 5,000 tanks lost, which we are far from, and it's going to probably, given the current ratio, as I already made the analysis, first year, according to Oryx, 1,600, probably a bit more because not everything was known. Second year, about 850 to 900. And next year, what? This doesn't mean, and I explained this doesn't mean that Russians are running out of tanks. This means that the front is shrinking, so there is less possibility to use as many tanks as before. It actually even means that Russia is concentrating more tanks, given the front is 1/3 of what it used. I did this analysis in TWK part 7 or 8. I'm not going to have to discuss this, but basically this is once again shows the absolute lack of analytical approach from David and Favelau, but Favelau is normal, he has no brain. At some point, they were out of vehicles to modernize in a decent way in the future. That's the problem. What's the point? I made the analysis. The second period of this war, up until November, the Russians had lost about 4,100 something vehicles in total assets, and the Ukrainians about 2,100 plus 200, while previously the Russians had lost 8,600 units and Ukrainians about 2,700. So when you see how it's going, it means that the Russians are losing less vehicles and the losses are cut in half. Okay, it's not very positive, as I said, because the front is shorter. But Ukrainians are losing almost the same number of assets, despite the fact that their front is shorter, and they should have the advantage, not vice versa. Once again, this is missing the core argument, not understanding how war works, but this is logical. Guys like David Hamlin, they're not there to explain you how war works. They're there to report what they think is happening and what their side is winning. Let us recall his March article this year, which said that 50,000 Ukrainian drones were going to sweep the Russians out. We are almost in December, and the Ukrainians control less of their territory than they started the year 2023, David. This is the reality. Of course, it's meaningless right now because it's not that much more gain from the Russians, but still, just to say that And then when this happens, Russia will have to build tanks from scratch. There is only one factory that can do this, which almost went bankrupt in 2016 and does not have a modern production line. So the UVZ Uralvagonzavod has not a modern production line, but it has at least produced 200, 220 based on the chassis numbers of T90M. Let me recall, guys, that Russia in 1 year has produced more than Rheinmetall in the last 10 years. And apparently, according to David and Favelan, these are T90Ms, so basically the most modern tank. But yet, they do not have a modern production line. They are making more modern tanks than everyone else at NATO, and they don't have a modern production line. It's magic. It's just magic. Tanks are essentially hand-built, and the UVZ factory appears to be turning out one batch of just 10 tanks every few months. I mean, I'm going to point out photos that actually were pointed out by Andre. You have at least 220 T90M chassis being built this year. Point. That's little less than 20 proven tanks per month, which is a bit more than one batch of just 10 tanks every few months. But it's okay. This is where the Russians are going to win. Being underestimated, being mocked, and being, in a sense, downtrodden. Russia would do far better if they modernized the stockpile T-22S properly than sending them off to be destroyed. In 2012, UVZ demonstrated the White Eagle T-72 variant AKT-P1MS, which had an improved engine, third-generation thermal imagers, better armor, and GPS glance navigation. First of all, the engine on the T-72B3 is already changed, just for starters. The T-72B1MS has only one major advantage over the T-72B3, which is the thermal imager, panoramic thermal imager for the commander. Everything else is still standard vanilla T-72B1 over 85. The base armor is worse than T-72B3 when the T-72B3 is modernized from a T-72B over 89. The reactive armor is worse. The coverage with K1 may be quote unquote better, but the effect of those elements is worse. As for the B1MS engine, it's the exact same. Yes, there is a small thermal camera for the driver, but once again, that will not change anything when you're going to be under fire from artillery, FPV drones, ATGMs, and so on. This is the funny part. However, it is indeed possible that the Russians had a crown jewel and they didn't take it. Actually, the Russians have been trying to uniformly modernize their tanks now for probably 25 years. Initially, it was thought to have a unified module, which would be basically a turret with a bustle autoloader. This was initially thought for the T-80 and was a offshoot of the Object 640, the so-called Black Eagle, which was supposed to be with the Cactus era and all that stuff. I'm not going to go back on the 640 because it's a great. It would have been an amazing site, but unfortunately, Russia wasn't economically able to modernize the tank. So the first attempts were to equip most of its tanks with a universal turret, which would mitigate a lot of the issues with the autoloader sitting in the hull. Second shot, the process of advancing towards a thermal imager actually started during Soviet times. I'm not going to start talking about Nocturne, ESA, and so on. Makes no sense. But just saying that was also an ongoing program. When this more or less coalesced into something doable, the Russians managed to come with the T-72B2. It's very funny that David doesn't start thinking, oh, T-72B3. Wasn't it a B1 or B2 before? No. He listened to Favelin, which is pushing a less able tank, because why not? So basically, the T-72B2 was a mix of what you have now on the T-90M, muzzle reference, external laser system, a better quote-unquote coverage, a full seam coverage that you see now on the T-80 BVM. But everything else remained. Like, engine was changed, but everything else remained. You didn't have a better insulation of the rounds. So basically, if you got hit, you blow all the same. Okay, the round positioning in the tank, they took out the loose stowage and reduced the round count to 39 and so on and so on. So, but basically, the tank itself, except for the frontal aspect, the thermal imager, and so on, were just the same. The tank would have been expensive for the Russia of 2004, 2005, but less expensive than what the T-72B3 cost, which was between $800,000 and $1 million for the modernization. Why? Because unfortunately, a lot of people in this app do not understand that the modernization of T-72B3 was undertaken in a completely different aspect. A lot of things in the tank were changed. So basically, in order to fire a better ammunition, anti-tank ammunition, you had to reduce the central cairn of the autoloader. So the VKU unit that was there was like a huge part impeding the total radius of the autoloader, was pulled out. Something smaller was installed. A lot of elements were added on the outside of the tank within the turret as well, which meant that the now total length ammunition could be up to 745 millimeter. Given that the ammunition is separated in two pieces in Soviet third generation tanks, that meant that your APVSDS penetrator could be between 580 up to 660 millimeters, which would have been the strict minimum to penetrate frontally most of NATO tanks. This, of course, a guy like Favelin is not going to say no, because all these persons are looking at stat sheets, are looking at the outside. They don't understand how a tank works. One thing that is missing in the article, and this is actually shit for me. I just realized right now that I spent a fuck ton of time for something it's ridiculously bad. Like it's beneath me. Is multiple things that the Soviets already had. So they had a tactical net that they used to disrupt incoming. Disappeared. It's funny. It's not being used, but now they have these so-called cope cages. This article is not speaking about APS. active protection system that the Soviets have now in at least 3 different iterations, and one that is very usable, and I was supposedly ordered by the Ministry of Defense in thousands. That was the alleged rumor back then, but apparently nothing has been done that way. The Arena M could help with the FPVs, given how the system works. Would it be the panacea? Probably not. Would it help with the slow-flying FPVs for at least 3, 4, or 5 of them? Probably yes. If you don't know what the APS is, it's basically, in the case of Arena, explosive cassettes laid out around the turret of the tank, activated by a proximity radar. And when something flies over 80 kilometers per hour around the tank, those radars can detect it, point out the movement, and send this countermeasure. And it's, in a sense, rather close to the Israeli trophy system. But this thing that could have been pointed out as missing in the modernization of the T-72s is not in the article. And that's the funny part of this thing. We have a guy who pretends to know what he's talking about, who's avoiding the two main subjects of contempt from a lot of people who know what the T-72 is about. First of all, that a supposedly better upgrade that was there before the T-72B3 was never undertaken, T-72B2 Rogatka, and that the APS that the Russians master for now probably 30 good years in different forms, be that Dosh, Drozd, whatever you want to call it, is not there, is not present. And that would, in my opinion, given now that the tanks are playing in smaller groups, change the situation. Instead of that, we have the Russians literally putting cope cages, reactive armor, everything around something as expensive as the T-90M, while a multispectral system, which would include EV, electrical warfare, APS, ERA, cope cages, and so on, could maybe not solve the situation, because you're going to still have your tracks exposed, and for as long as something is exposed, it's going to happen. And even the APS is stopping every single one of your FPVs for as long as you get cartridges in the APS. What happens when it's saturated? And we've seen, as I said, we've seen the Ukrainians use up to 7 FPVs for one T-80. It will not change much. It would take them 20 FPVs to take out the tank, but FPVs are still going to be cheap. Even if they have to be $1,000 a piece, it's $20,000 investment against a tank that objectively cannot outrun those FPVs. So that's what I said. There are a lot of alleys to modernize these tanks and make them a bit more impervious to assaults, but none of these modernization aspects are in this article. No, what is in this article is literally a hatchet job on a system that is obviously not well understood from David and from Favelão, and that's it. Now, I don't think that David is going to make any good on his promise to make another article, because I'm extremely critical of him. But if David wants to make a counter article on that, I'll gladly type a whole piece and point out to sources and send them to him. But that's not the point here. The point is just to show that in this war, propaganda has been risen to a level where it drives people completely mad and stupid. And this is one of those cases. Unfortunately, yeah, I took the time to make this space. I hope that our friend David is going to listen to it. It's a bit longish. It's filled with expletives, but hopefully, he would take the time and start analyzing where he went wrong, while he is doing this as supposedly journalist, and why all these things that I said here are unfortunately facts, and yeah, maybe change. He's not going to change because there is a obvious propaganda aspect here and an obvious almost religious crusade against Russia. But that's what it is. That's what it is. I'm sorry, guys. It was long, and I would like to apologize for this lengthy subject. I wanted to make it as short as possible, but I said that it would be better to read this article and give it at least one kind of response. Thank you very much. I'm not going to take questions because it has nothing to do with the usual space. It's just so that the person in question would be able to listen to it. The actual space over the front and over the developments is going to be probably on Saturday around 3 p.m. CET, so Central European Time. Thank you very much. I hope David change his mind over what he has written in his article, and if he wants to have sources or whatever, I can provide him, or at least a couple of pointers. And yeah, have a nice day. Thank you very much, guys. Bye.